The ghost of Rosewarne. Ezekiel Gross was a respected lawyer from a well-off background. He bought the lands of Rosewarne from a member of the Rosewarne family. That family member had run into financial trouble while trying to maintain their social status without enough money. There is reason to believe that Ezekiel Gross was the legal advisor to this unfortunate member of the Rosewarne family. Whatever the truth may be, Ezekiel Gross had barely settled in a Rosewarne before he began hearing strange and unsettling noises. At first, the sound seemed unearthly. Then, on a particularly dark night, he was shocked to see a ghost, a worn and aged man, appear before him. The first appearance was in the park, but he subsequently repeated his visits in the house. This always happened after dark. Ezekiel Gross was not a man to be terrified at trifles, and for some time he paid but slight attention to his nocturnal visitor. However, the ghost's repeated visits and its strange, mysterious signs soon became a great annoyance to Ezekiel. One night, when seated in his office examining some deeds, and being rather irritable, having lost an important suit, his visitor approached him, making some strange indications which the lawyer could not understand. Ezekiel suddenly exclaimed, "In the name of God, what do you want?" "To show you, Ezekiel Gross, where the gold you want lies buried." No one ever lived upon whom the greed of gold was stronger than on Ezekiel. Still, he hesitated, shaken by the ghost's eerie presence. Now that the spirit had spoken so clearly, Ezekiel trembled in every limb as it slowly delivered its message in a deep, hollow voice. The lawyer looked fixedly on the specter, but he dared not utter a word. He longed to obtain possession of the secret, yet he feared to ask him where he was to find this treasure. The specter looked as fixedly at the poor, trembling lawyer, as if enjoying the sight of his terror. At length, lifting his finger, he beckoned Ezekiel to follow him, turning at the same time to leave the room. Ezekiel was glued to his seat. He could not exert strength enough to move, although he desired to do so. "Come," said the ghost in a hollow voice. The lawyer was powerless to come. "Gold!" exclaimed the old man, in a whining tone, though in a louder key. "Where?" gasped Ezekiel. "Follow me, and I will show you," said the ghost. Ezekiel endeavored to rise, but it was in vain. "I command thee, come," almost shrieked the ghost. Ezekiel felt that he was compelled to follow his friend, and by some supernatural power rather than his own, he followed the specter out of the room and through the hall into the park. They passed onward through the night, the ghost gliding before the lawyer and guiding him by a peculiar phosphorescent light which appeared to glow from every part of the form. They continued on until they reached a small valley, where they came upon a pile of stones made of granite boulders. By this the specter rested, and when Ezekiel had approached it and was standing on the other side of the cairn, still trembling, the aged man, looking fixedly in his face, said in low tones, "Ezekiel Gross, you long for gold as once I did. I won a glittering prize, but I could not enjoy it. Heaps of treasure are buried beneath those stones. It is yours if you dig for it. When the gold, Ezekiel, shine among the wicked ones of the world, and when you are at your happiest, I will come to visit you." The ghost then disappeared. As soon as Gross could recover himself from the extreme trepidation the result of mixed feelings, he looked about him, and finding himself alone, he exclaimed, "Ghost or devil, I will soon prove whether or not you are telling the truth." Ezekiel is said to have heard a laugh echoing between the hills as he said those words. The lawyer noted well the spot, returned to his house, pondered on all the circumstances of his case. He eventually resolved to seize the earliest opportunity when he might do so unobserved. He would remove the stones and examine the ground beneath them. A few nights after this, Ezekiel went to the little cairn, and by the aid of a crowbar, he soon overturned the stones and laid the ground bare. He then commenced digging, and had not proceeded far when his spade struck against some other metal. He carefully cleared away the earth, and he then felt, for he could not see, having no light with him, that he had uncovered a metallic urn of some kind. He found it quite impossible to lift it, and he was therefore compelled to cover it up again and to replace the stone sufficiently to hide it from the observation of any chance wanderer. The next night, Ezekiel found that this urn, which was of bronze, contained gold coins of a very ancient date. He loaded himself with his treasure and returned home. From time to time, at night, as Ezekiel found, he could do so without exciting the suspicions of his servants. He visited the urn, and thus by degrees removed all the treasure to Rosewarne House. There was nothing in the series of circumstances which had surrounded Ezekiel which he could less understand than the fact that the ghost of the old man had left off troubling him from the moment when he had disclosed to him the hiding place of this treasure. The neighboring gentry could not but observe the rapid improvements which Ezekiel Gross made in his mansion, his grounds, in his personal appearance, and indeed in everything by which he was surrounded vastly improved. In a short time he abandoned the law and led in every respect the life of a country gentleman. He ostentatiously paraded his power to procure all earthly enjoyments, and, in spite of his notoriously bad character, he succeeded in drawing many of the landed proprietors around him. Things went well with Ezekiel. The man who could in those days visit London in his own carriage and four was not without a large circle of theatres. The lawyer who had struggled hard, in the outset of life, to secure wealth, and who did not always employ the most honest means for doing so, now found himself the center of a circle to whom he could preach honesty. He could receive from them expressions of the admiration in which the world holds the possessor of gold. His old tricks were forgotten, and he was put in places of honor. This state of things continued for some time. Indeed, Gross's entertainments became more and more splendid. His revels became more and more seductive to those he admitted to share them with him. The Lord of Rosewarne was the Lord of the West. To him every one bowed the knee. He walked the earth as the proud possessor of a large share of the planet. It was Christmas Eve, and a large gathering there was at Rosewarne. In the hale the ladies and gentlemen were in the full enjoyment of the dance, and in the kitchen all the tenantry and the servants were emulating their superiors. Everything went joyously, and when mirth was in hell swing, and Ezekiel felt to the full the influence of wealth, it appeared as if in one moment the chill of death had fallen over everyone. The dancers paused and looked one at another, each one struck with the other's paleness. And there in the middle of the hail, everyone saw a strange old man looking angrily, but in silence, at Ezekiel Gross, who was fixed in terror, blank as a statue. No one had seen this old man enter the hall. Yet there he was in the midst of them. It was but for a minute, and he was gone. Ezekiel, as if a frozen torrent of water had thawed in an instant, roared with impetuous laughter. What do you think of that for a Christmas play? There was an old Father Christmas for you. Ha 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 ha. How frightened you all look. Butler, order the men to hand round the spiced wines. On with the dancing, my friends. It was only a trick, and a clever one, which I have put upon you. On with your dancing, my friends. Notwithstanding his boisterous attempts to restore the spirit of the evening, Ezekiel could not succeed. There was an influence stronger than any which he could command, and one by one, framing sundry excuses, his guests took their departure, every one of them satisfied that all was not right at Rosewarne. From that Christmas Eve Gross was a changed man. He tried to be his former self, but it was in vain. Again and again he called his gay companions around him, but at every feast there appeared one more than was desired. An aged man weird beyond measure took his place at the table in the middle of the feast, and although he spoke not, he exerted a miraculous power over all. No one dared to move, no one ventured to speak. Occasionally Ezekiel assumed an appearance of courage, which he felt not, rallied his guests, and made sundry excuses for the presence of his aged friend, whom he represented as having a mental infirmity, as being deaf and dumb. On all such occasions the old man rose from the table, and, looking at the host, laughed a demoniac laugh of joy, and departed as quietly as he came. The natural consequence of this was that Ezekiel Gross's friends fell away from him, and he became a lonely man amidst his vast possessions, his only companion being his faithful clerk, John Call. The persecuting presence of the specter became more and more constant, and wherever the poor lawyer went, there was the aged man at his side. from being one of the finest men in the county. He became a miserably attenuated and bowed old man. Misery was stamped on every feature, terror was indicated in every movement. At length he appears to have besought his ghostly attendant to free him of his presence. It was long before the ghost would listen to any terms, but when Ezekiel at length agreed to surrender the whole of his wealth to anyone whom the specter might indicate, he obtained a promise that upon this being carried out in a perfectly legal manner in favor of John Call, that he should no longer be haunted. This was after numerous struggles on the part of Ezekiel to retain his property, or at least some portion of it, legally settled, and John Call became possessor of Rosewarne and the adjoining lands. Gross was then informed that this evil spirit was one of the ancestors of the Rosewarne, from whom by his fraudulent dealings he obtained the place, and that he was allowed to visit the earth again for the purpose of inflicting the most condign punishment on the avaricious lawyer. His avarice had been gratified, his pride had been pampered to the highest, and then he was made a pitiful spectacle at whom all men pointed and no one pitied. He lived on in misery, but it was for a short time. He was found dead, and the country people ever said that his death was a violent one. They spoke of marks on his body, and some even asserted that the specter of the Rosewarne was seen rejoicing amidst a crowd of devils, as they bore the spirit of Ezekiel over Carnbrea. Halls thus quaintly tells this story. Rosewarne, located in this parish, gave its owner the name de Rosewarne. One member of this family sold the land during the reign of James I to Ezekiel Gross, a gentleman and attorney at law, who then made it his home. In this place, he amassed a great fortune, partly through his legal practice, but even more, so the legend goes, through the intervention of a spirit or apparition that haunted him. The ghost tormented him until he finally spoke to it, for, as is well known, apparitions are too proud to speak first. Once addressed, the spirit revealed the location of a hidden treasure within the mansion. Following the ghost's instructions, Ezekiel uncovered the treasure, greatly increasing his wealth. However, after this discovery, the apparition became even more relentless, disturbing him day and night. Eventually, the haunting grew so unbearable that he abandoned the estate, despite all the riches it had brought him. He relinquished his claim by either giving or selling the property to his clerk, John Call. Call's son, John Call, later sold it to Robert Hooker, a gentleman and attorney at law, who now owns it. The Call family's coat of arms featured 3 trumpets, a reference to their name in English. Interestingly, in Cornish British, the word call or cow refers to something hard, flinty, or unyielding, while hurgaroo means trumpet.